Welcome to this evening's distinguished speaker seminar on how to use AI to strengthen and speed learning. This is a long-running series at the Said Business School where industry leaders are invited to share their experiences and insights. My name is Olav Shui. I'm currently a DPhil student in education. But previously, I've completed an MBA here at the business school, so it's an honor for me to be back at the school and to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Barbara Oakley. Together with Taryn Sejnovsky at the Salk Institute, she has created one of the world's most popular massive open online courses, Learning How to Learn, with more than 5 million students. Through her books, A Mind for Numbers, Learning How to Learn, Learn Like a Pro, and Uncommon Sense Teaching, she has reached millions of readers around the world in more than 24 languages. And she's also become a New York Times best-selling author. Having had the privilege to write a book with Barbara, I can also say that she is an exceptionally genuine and warm person, and perhaps the most hardworking individual that I've ever met. Dr. Oakley has won numerous awards and recognitions, including the McGraw Prize, which is often regarded as the Nobel Prize of Education. Today, Dr. Oakley will first show us what happens in the brain when we learn, and then build on that to help us better understand generative AI. After the talk, she will take questions from you, the audience, and please use the Menti for submitting questions. And then after the talk at 7, all of you who are here in person are welcome to join us in the foyer for networking and drinks. And we hope as many as possible of you will join us there. So with that, please join me in giving Dr. Oakley a warm Oxford welcome.
I have to say, I am so excited to be here, so thank you so much. And I should begin by just kind of giving you a little sense of the importance of AI. AI won't replace humans, as Fei-Fei Li says, but humans who use AI will replace humans that don't. So it behooves us all to learn as much as we can about AI, generative AI, and what it can do for us. So I should back up a minute and give you a little sense of where I'm coming from. I grew up moving all over the United States. So by the time I was about 15 years old, I'd lived in 10 different places. Now the thing about moving a lot when you're a kid is that mathematics is very sequential. And if you fall off anywhere along the line, it can be tough to get back on. Well, when I was 7 years old, I was moving from Texas to Massachusetts. They were suddenly so far ahead of me in the multiplication tables. Well, you know, I could never really I didn't care about math. And so when I started flunking, oh well, you know, I just gave up. I thought, I don't have the math gene. And I flunked my way through elementary, middle, and high school math and science, which is really kind of ironic since I am standing here in front of you today as a distinguished professor of engineering. And I'm the real deal. I publish in top journals and so forth. But one day, one of my engineering students found out about my sordid past as a math flunky. And he said, well, how'd you do it? How'd you change your brain? And I thought, you know, how did I do it? Because I was a little girl who just, I like that picture of me because it is the last cute picture of me. But I loved animals and knitting and weaving and all that kind of stuff. And I knew I could never grow up and do anything technical. So I thought, well, then what I'd like to do is learn another language. I didn't live in an area where there were lots of different language speakers. So, and I couldn't afford to go to college and learn a new language there. But I found out there was one way to learn a new language and actually get paid for it, and that was to join the Army. So that released me, looking super nervous, about to throw a grenade. And if you knew how clumsy I am, you would know why I look so nervous. But I did learn another language. I learned Russian. And I should have learned Spanish, since our little granddaughter is growing up bilingual with her daddy being from Chile. But I ended up working out on Soviet trawlers up in the Bering Sea. And I just loved having new perspectives and new adventures. So I also ended up at the South Pole Station in Antarctica, which is where I met my husband. So that was some 40 years ago, and I wouldn't be here without his creativity and encouragement. But the thing is, I'd done everything everyone had always told me to do. I'd followed my passion, I'd learned something really well, and I'd also put myself in a career box because I wasn't like opening up. Instead of just following my passion, I should have broadened my passions. So eventually, when I was getting out of the military in my late 20s, I decided to try and see if I could change my brain. And gradually, I started with the lowest possible level of high school remedial algebra, began climbing my way upwards, and surprisingly, the higher I climbed, the better I did. And I fell in love with math and science. And so what I want to share with you today is some information about how we learn and use that to help you better understand the pluses and the minuses of generative AI. So let's begin with just a little bit of a sense of the brain. We know it's enormously complicated. But the thing is, if we look at it, there's one very important building block, and that's the neuron. And I know what you're thinking here is, okay, now this is where she gets to the super boring scientific stuff. So let's spice it up a little bit. So this is our metaphor or analogy for our neuron. It's a space alien. And the space alien has legs, as you can see. And those 3 legs are similar to the dendrites on a neuron. And the legs have toes on them. And, it's a space alien. It can have lots of toes. And similarly, there are dendritic spines sprouting off the dendrites of neurons. And lastly, there's an axon that reaches out. So what neurons love to do is they like to reach out and tickle the toes, essentially, of an adjoining neuron. And what this is really doing is it is making connections as neurons are sending signals to one another. Now, So whenever you're learning something, you are actually creating connections between neurons. So unfortunately, we've heard from educators and psychologists in the last few decades, you don't need to memorize anything, you can always just look it up. But actually, to gain real expertise in anything, you need to have it in long-term memory. Could I speak Spanish if I always just used Google Translate? Of course not. So learning something and having it in long-term memory is vitally important. How do we kind of strengthen those connections? Practice. That can really help with making stronger connections. And as you will soon see, that relates as well to what's going on with generative AI. Now, what happens if you don't practice? Well, then your little synaptic janitors can just sweep those connections away. So ultimately, when we're learning, we're creating these sets of links, and the more we practice, the stronger they get, and the easier it is to pull them to mind whenever we might need them. So one important idea that I want to share, though, is once you have an idea or a concept or a technique, you can use that as a bridge to learn something else much more easily. So in this case, let's say you know how water flows. Easy, right? Except if you're a little kid, you spend years playing with water. But let's say you've got the idea of water flow. You can use that as a method to more easily help people understand the flow of electric current. It's a metaphor. It's not perfect. In fact, every metaphor will break down at some point. I mean, for electricity, it's like at quantum levels and so forth. It's a completely different story. But good luck with finding a metaphor at quantum levels. So, how do we come up with metaphors? Well, generative AI. It is invaluable. And metaphors are an incredibly valuable tool. When I was working on the book of Mind for Numbers, I thought, you don't get to pick the name of your book. Your publisher does. And they told me, your book's going to be called A Mind for Numbers. And I thought, that's the most boring name for a book you could ever imagine. But it has sold well over 1 million worldwide. And part of what I did was I reached out to thousands of top teachers and professors and asked them, what techniques do you use to help you teach effectively? And shocking numbers of top teachers, and professors, they'd look at the manuscript, they'd give really good comments, but then they'd say to me on the side, there's one little thing I do, and that is that I use metaphor and analogy. And that is the magic that helps me be a great teacher. But I don't tell anyone else that I do this, because if I tell other teachers I do this, what they say is, that's why you're such a popular teacher. You make it so easy for students. But isn't that our job as teachers? So let's look at generative AI and what it does. So let's say that you want to teach Python programming, and you want to better describe the difference between main guard and scope. And you're thinking, how do I reach my students? Well, generative AI comes up with a nice, simple metaphor for you. Think of main guard as the gatekeeper of a castle, and scope as the various rooms within that castle. And of course, it gives you lots more information. So I think that before, it's always been difficult to find metaphors. But now, it's incredibly easy. In fact, if you think of it as metaphors can have points where things are very similar, between the metaphor and what you're trying to explain, and other areas where they're not similar. So you can find metaphors with 2, 3, 4, 5 points of similarity just by asking ChatGPT. So let's go see, what does ChatGPT actually do? Most of us probably know that it's built off of prediction. It predicts the next word in a sentence as it's being trained. But there was kind of a problem. What they really needed is they needed a way to relate the words, for example, within a sentence. And if you remember 5 years ago, it was terrible translations whenever you tried to get a translation. Well, that was because by the time the computer, and if you'll forgive the anthropomorphization, by the time the computer got to the end of the sentence, it forgot what was at the beginning. Because it couldn't really relate those and keep in mind all the relationships between words. But using fantastic new techniques, now all those words can be related to one another, and not only the words in a sentence, but words in essays, words throughout the net. So this happened because of a wonderful innovation called, from a paper called Attention is All You Need. And this paper introduced the idea of the transformer. So it's kind of funny. So my colleague and co-instructor in teaching Learning How to Learn, he runs the Neural Information Processing conference where this particular paper was presented. This conference is so incredibly popular. For example, if it opens up with 7,000 positions available, it is filled. All 7,000 registrants are taken within about 7 minutes. So it's an incredibly important conference. But when this paper was presented, it's hard to predict how important papers are going to be. And they just thought, we'll relegate it over to a poster. Actually, nowadays, this paper has been cited over 100,000 times. So it's quite an important paper. In fact, what this paper does is it introduced the idea of the transformer, which has this encoder, and actually this positional encoding right there, that's the magic that allowed them to create a vector that relates all the words to one another. And so we can feed in our prompt, and then the decoder will come out with whatever we need or whatever it decides we need. So transformers are so incredibly popular that even now you can go to places like Suno.com, which has got a little bit of trouble now with potentially taking information from music websites. But you can go to Suno.com, and someone has, and they created a song, Attention is All You Need, about the transformer. I don't know, it's just kind of fun. So transformers are really important, but from our perspective, they are important because the flow of information through a transformer is very similar to the flow of information through the human brain. So the more we can understand about how the brain is working, the better we can understand some aspects of AI, of generative AI. So let's jump now to looking at ChatGPT. What is it? It is probably everybody's played a little bit with it. It was created by a company called OpenAI, and this now is sort of under the aegis of Microsoft. And the thing is, though, that all of the major international companies, so Google, Amazon, X, so forth, they each have their own generative AI platform. And these are all based on their, or are called, foundational large language models. So you can kind of think of it as there's a tree with a number of branches. You know, they're all using the ideas, but flourishing in their own way. And the reality is, though, there were 149 foundational large language models released in 2023. So, you know, if you're confused by the plethora of different large language models that are coming out, that could be why. So the thing that to remember, though, is that large language models are a bit like a car. If you learn to drive one car, you can usually get into another car and drive it, okay. It may have some subtle differences, not that big a deal. And using a large language model is actually less intimidating if you realize that those differences between the different models are kind of like just having different engines of a car. So you play with one, play with another, and but it's all kind of the same underlying idea. Now, if we think about large language models, though, in terms of what kind of similarity is there to the human brain, it's interesting because there's been so much work between one another in the discipline of neuroscience and artificial intelligence that they've informed them each other as they've developed. And so we can use that sort of informational transfer, or the way that they've developed AI, to better understand or or we can use our understanding of the brain to better understand how AI works. So remember I had mentioned that we have a set of links that we get when we learn something. But I kind of cheated a little bit. There's actually 2 ways that we can have those neural links made. And they're made through 2 learning systems of the brain. So don't worry, you don't need to remember these specifics. But in essence, our working memory is sort of mostly in the prefrontal cortex. We can hold about 4 pieces of information in our working memory. It used to be 7, thought to be 7. Sometimes it's now thought to be 2, so it goes back and forth. But we can only hold a limited amount in our working memory. But what we do is we take in information in working memory, which I symbolize with that. It's not an octopus, it's actually a quadrupus. It's only got 4 arms for 4 pieces of information. We take that information in and we put it through the hippocampus into long-term memory. But the other way that we take in information is through that automatic pathway, which runs through the basal ganglia. Now, the trick is, they're links that are for 2 different purposes. Let's say you drive home to your new apartment. The first time you do it, it's very declarative. Let's see, it says I'm supposed to turn left here, turn right here. But then after you've done it dozens of times, you can drive all the way home, not even thinking about it. Oh, you were going to stop at the store, but you were so used to just driving the whole way that you forgot to stop at the store. So it's that automatic pathway is for things we do a lot. When you're young and you learn your native language, you learn it through that automatic set of pathways. When you're older and you're learning a language, you learn it more declaratively. And the more you practice with it, the more it becomes automatic. So you need both pathways to be, kind of able to function well in the world. So if you think of that declarative conscious pathway as that blue box, and then the automatic pathway as that sort of reddish box, then we're going to take those and we're going to look at it in a different way. So remember, the basal ganglia has that automatic pathway. Hippocampus mostly has that declarative pathway. And the hippocampal pathway is conscious mostly, and that basal ganglia is non-conscious. So as we are thinking about something, so we're consciously thinking about it, we're step by step going through that hippocampal pathway, maybe to figure out a math problem or something of that nature. And so that we are conscious of, but we are not conscious of what's going on through that basal ganglia automatic pathway. And this pathway is remarkably similar to what is going on with the deep learning networks of large language models. So this very deep non-conscious set of or way of processing materials is, it's something that can help us understand what's going on with AI. And part of how that can happen, when we're learning through that automatic pathway, we're basically practicing a number of times, over and over, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't. That's, in essence, what generative AI is doing. And interestingly, if you think about it, in the human brain, if you knock out that prefrontal cortex conscious way of thinking of things, what can happen is hallucination and confabulation. And in some sense, the reason that generative AI can confabulate so easily is because it doesn't have that conscious way of thinking about things. So it's getting better, but it's always there. Sometimes people have told me, well, don't think of AI as your instructional assistant. And I said, well, you can think of it as your instructional assistant, but it's just an assistant that is a little insane sometimes. And we worry about AI because as teachers and professors, it has completely pulled the rug out from under us. We can't give any of the same, or mostly cannot give any of the same homework assignments, essays, and so forth that we've always given over hundreds, even thousands of years. So the tendency from academia, understandably, is to be like, generative AI, that's not for me. But the reality is, again, to repeat Fei Li's saying, AI won't replace humans, but humans who use AI will replace those who don't. So our successors are going to know better and better how to use this remarkable new innovation. So let's look now. So I've already introduced these a way of framing some of the top large language models. But let's look more closely at what those large language models can do. So there's many software intermediaries for specific functions. So most of these grow from ChatGPT just because it was first out of the gate. So we have writing assistants. Most of you probably have heard of like Grammarly and use it. Some of these other writing assistants are actually remarkable. And sometimes now, researchers are beginning to become concerned because it can enable us as professors to put out lots more papers. So whether those papers are high quality, that's another question. But I do think it's worthwhile checking on some of these different assistants and so forth that are available for you, because you can find that they really can be helpful. So as far as research goes, there's a whole plethora of different programs that are available for you. So I like to use Scite, SCITE_. But Semantic Scholar is also very important. Many of these research types of apps are often trained on different kinds of material. So for example, ChatGPT is trained on the entire web, but some of these research apps, for example, Semantic Scholar, is trained on 200 million different research papers. So it has very different underlying training. Then, of course, we have live to internet sorts of device or apps, Copilot, Perplexity, which is in a little trouble recently. And then there's all sorts of good applications for teachers as well. There's creative productivity platforms and, of course, coding platforms. And if you look to the left here, there's wonderful new imagery, some of it arising from ChatGPT, but others coming from other sources. So we have Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, Dream Studio, and so forth. And then, of course, video is still slow to really take off, but there are some companies that are specializing in video. And I have a feeling within the next few years, they'll be very, very powerful. And it'll be a great tool to help us create materials for online teaching that are riveting. So, in fact, you might notice in the presentation that I'm giving here, do you notice how I'll take an idea, and if I'm continuing with the same concept, I will often put the concept symbol in a corner and then talk it through, and that symbol will help you carry through to see I'm still talking about the same concept. So let's see, I'm going to back up just a minute to show you what I mean. So let's see, we've got, okay, now large language models, we're talking about that. Notice how that comes here. And then notice how it's continuing here. We're still talking about large language models. So as we're moving along, I'm trying to illustrate that we're still talking about many of the same ideas. And you can do this kind of online, or if you teach this way online, you can make much more effective use of engaging activities. But I'll talk a little bit more about this in just a moment. So there we go. Okay, so so I have to thank Teaching with AI, which gave some of the material in the previous slide. That's a wonderful book. So if you're interested in using generative AI, that's a good one to start with. Another book that's great is Ethan Mullick's Co-Intelligence. These are both practical books. So some very good theoretical books are The Worlds I See and The Alignment Problem, which I think is a fantastic book that gives you an insight into all the ways that AI had to learn how to learn in ways that are similar to how humans learn. How do you model, for example, human curiosity within a generative AI environment? The alignment problem will tell you exactly how they did this. Of course, there's also very good books or good courses on generative AI. I tend to be a little biased towards Coursera, so I highly recommend some of these courses. And when you're looking for particular tools, I recommend these two websites, which can give you some real insight, and an easy way to find a tool that you are looking for specifically. So I just want to give you a little bit of a sense of how generative AI is really changing software development. So this is a picture of Greg Brockman, and he is the co-founder and president of OpenAI. And he decided to make he wrote down something, here it says, what he wrote on his little notebook. My joke website, really dumb joke 1, and then push to reveal punchlines, same but joke 2. So that's what he wrote. He uploaded a picture onto ChatGPT and asked for it to develop the coding behind it, and then all the coding just appeared as if by magic. That's just a part of the coding that had to be, or that was generated. But what's interesting, though, is I took that same photo and I uploaded it into ChatGPT, generated this nice output that you see. Then I uploaded it into Claude, which is also one of my favorites. And Claude said, a joke website? That could be harmful for people. I won't create a joke website. So I argued with Claude for a little bit. And Claude finally was like, okay, I can see that getting rid of humor altogether is maybe not a good idea. But that tells you a little bit about the different training techniques. So each AI platform, these large language models, has their own individual characteristic. So we have model architecture, and what I'm meaning by this is we can have a closed architecture like ChatGPT. That means that all those neural net weightings we don't know what they are. That's hidden. It's knowledge of the company alone. Now, Meta AI, based on Llama 3, is open, or at least mostly open. And you can see what the weighting is. So very different approaches. They train on different data. So ChatGPT, massive internet. Meta AI, it's trained on a subset of the internet. Semantic Scholar, as I mentioned, trained on all these research papers. So different training. Tuning is different. Some of them are tuned to be, very nice, very friendly, very interactive. Others are, more, straight to the point and so forth. So they can have different personalities. Some are more formal and informative. Others are a little bit more friendly and approachable. So it's a good idea to try some of these different large language models, because some are good at some things, but some are better at others. And until you play with it, you really won't know. So GPT within ChatGPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. So we're back to that importance of transformer. Now, I want to just close by giving you just a little sense of how generative AI can help you with your teaching. And I'll just give you a few little tidbits. So we know that having a good hook, some compelling question, for example, at the beginning of a class, can really help students get engaged. And the reason for that is because, well, when you have something that creates curiosity, it helps with learning. They've found, in fact, that little mice that get their dopamine systems inactivated can't learn anything new. So you want to activate that curiosity, which is in some sense potentiating that dopamine. And how do you do that? Well, ask ChatGPT to give you some ideas for how to provoke curiosity. So, for example, a few weeks ago, I was in Mongolia. That's me on the most interesting Mongolian pony. And I was told a lot of students come off the Mongolian steppe and they're really not very interested in what's being taught. So let's take our question of Python programming. How can I connect these ideas to nomadic ways of Mongolian life? Well, I asked and I got the answer, which is it relates to herding and enclosures, yurts and tents. A problem for us as teachers is sometimes we just can't go to the same place our students are in or from. But this, because of generative AI's great outreach, it can give us insights in ways we've never been able to before to help onboard our students, get them more engaged, and to be able to identify with whatever we're teaching. So also, remember I mentioned that working memory has something like 4 pieces of information that it can hold. So we like to think that our students will come up, they've studied for the test, and they can just kind of come to the test, pull out these sets of links they've created through their practice and insights, and voila, they give you great answers. But of course, some students don't really prepare well. They think they do. They reread a bunch of times. They underline like crazy, but they haven't tested themselves through retrieval practice to see if they really have the information. So what happens is they sit down to the test and they realize they didn't really know it. But when we're thinking about working memory, what is working memory's the real problem for us is it only can hold a limited amount of information. But what's fascinating is that working memory actually we can hold 4 pieces of information, but generative AI can hold tens of thousands and more pieces of information and meld them together in a way that we carefully prompt it to provide our answers. So all I can say is join the revolution. There's a lot of great insight and help for us as teachers in generative AI. And so I thank you very much.
Thank you for a very insightful lecture, Barb. We received a lot of questions to you, and let's start with this one. If generative AI becomes so intelligent and we rely on it for our learning solely, won't it make us dumber?
No, that's a very valid concern, because if you look from the 1930s through the 1970s, there was solid evidence that IQ scores were increasing. Educators were like, you know, it's us. It's that great education we're giving. But after 1970, it's going down. And there's pretty good evidence. And that critical point in the 1970s, even within families, the older child is more intelligent on average than the younger children. So what happened in the 1970s that caused this change? Well, that's when calculators came out. And then suddenly it was, you don't need to remember this stuff. You can always just look it up. But then we can't gain that expertise anymore. So when it comes to generative AI, we need to be more careful than we were during that calculator stage when we got that input. Because it's so tempting to say, oh, we don't need to teach them how to write because, you know, generative AI can do it for them. But if they don't get those essentials, they'll always struggle with their writing. So how we do that, the only way I can see now is specific times during classes where students have to write without generative AI and access to it.
Yeah, and so perhaps building on that, one person is saying that AI is great, but some students and teachers seem almost addicted to it. How to be smart and wise about AI?
I think just let time go by. Now, it's new, it's exciting. Pretty soon it will start seeming a little old hat, and some of that excessive attention will decline.
Yeah. Now with the emergence of AI, what type of experts do you think will be in demand 5 to 10 years from now?
Oh. I think, as I tell my children, the more you can learn about generative AI, the better off you will be. So take any extra, follow your interests, but broaden them by including learning about generative AI.
Yeah. We also have people in the room with microphones, so if there are anyone who would like to ask a question into the microphone, you can please raise your hand, and there's one there, so if you can give her a microphone.
The audience questions are always always the toughest.
Hi, I'm Celine, and I work at Saïd Business School. I've been teaching my professional community how to use generative AI and prompt engineering to do research for fundraising. And I'm wondering when we're going to get it's so that the AIs can learn about a specific area of knowledge, and that they can do continuous learning. I'm looking forward to that so that we can each, and do you think that when we get there, that we will each have our own, or that there will be a body of learned information about a subject area or an institution?
Well, right now, institutions, or like me as a person, I've uploaded all of my books and created a Ask Barb GPT. So it has all of my knowledge base, that specialized knowledge base, that I've created. And it is so easy that it's shocking. Like I'll tell different organizations I work with, you can create it in 10 minutes. I mean, the big part that's tough is just getting all your PDFs together. So, but you can create it in 10 minutes. Just go to ChatGPT and it'll have a little plus sign and you can create your own GPT there. So now, did that answer? I think I'm leaving something dangling.
I meant more if
Okay.
Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question in the room? Let's see, maybe this person behind the second row.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Meliha and I'm from Queen Mary University of London. I'm a student. So I represent my course there, which is digital analytics, and it is more related to AI and all. So my question is, half of my university teachers, in fact 70%, they are in favor of AI if you're taking ideas and using them for the assignments and all. And half of them, 30% maybe, they're not in favor of them. But if we talk about the industry and the trends, everything is changing due to AI, right? When we go into the market, we have to know how to use the AI properly. So do you know, because is there any tool which can accurately tell, this was taken from AI or not? If you talk about plagiarism or anything, because students like me, for the first semester I was struggling with this stuff, but there were some class members who actually did their assignments with AI. I was actually checking my assignment on other platforms which were not reliable. So we don't know if there are any tools, or in future there are going to be any tools which can actually detect AI properly 100%, like Turnitin, we have a tool, right? It detects plagiarism. So for AI thing, is there going to be any tool for industry, like for CVs or anything? Because we don't know how industry is interpreting this AI. And for us students, it's really difficult to, even we should use it or not use it. So we are in between. So please suggest. Thank you.
Not that I know of. It's really tough because no matter how good a tool might be at deducing and deducting whether something is generated by generative AI, there'll be some workaround for that, and then it'll obviate the whole thing. So I wish there was. I think it's almost like a nuclear explosion, at least metaphorically speaking, in what's going on with education. None of us had any idea that this would happen, but it's really causing havoc, and we're having to rethink everything. But one thing that I should mention in defense of generative AI is students who really want to learn. I remember I wanted more and more problems in engineering when I was studying it, with how to, the solutions for those problems. So I could take that problem, try and solve it, and then if I couldn't get it, at least I could learn how to do it. Well, for most teachers, it's like, I'm keeping all my old tests and so forth hidden from you, because it's hard to develop tests. But nowadays, you can get solutions to almost anything. And the nice thing about that is if you are really determined to learn, you can use that to give yourself more practice and more insight.
Yeah, great. I think that's what we have time for now. Thank you to everyone for joining in person. Thanks to everyone who's been joining online. And I hope to see as many of you as possible out in the reception. And thank you.